everyone, and welcome to the Twisted Hour podcast, where we unravel the unknown, the unsolved, and the utterly devious corners of true crime. I'm Whitney, and tonight's case, oh, it's one that left everyone stunned. Not because of what happened, but because of how it happened. Tonight, we are covering the bizarre disappearance of Charlie Bothuell V. So, in 2014, in a quiet little block on Nicollet Place in Detroit, Michigan, it became the center of a case that sparked outrage, finger pointing, and some of the most difficult conversations about abuse. And if you remember anything at all about this case, it's probably that live TV moment with Nancy Grace. Yes, the one where law enforcement interrupted an interview to tell Charlie on air that his son had been found. Now, you would expect tears, relief, shock, something real. Instead, he gave a reaction that will forever go down in history. So grab your tea, get comfortable, and join me under the full moon as we dive into the twisted, mind-boggling case of Charlie Bothuell V. We're going to dive into the uncovering of his disappearance, the shocking discovery, and the dark legal mess that followed. And when I tell you the legal mess was upsetting, it was truly upsetting. So, I always like to start my stories with a little bit of context, like some backstory on the people involved. So, Charlie Bothuell V was born on September 10th of 2001. He was the son of Charles Bothuell IV. I guess in this case would be senior. So to keep things clear, I'll do my best to refer to the son as Charlie and the father as Mr. Bothuell. On the surface, Charlie seemed like a typical 12-year-old. He was quiet, friendly, and easygoing. But behind his bright smile, Charlie was struggling with something deep. He had trouble focusing in school, he fell behind academically, and in response, his father decided to homeschool him. A decision that would, well, it was a decision that would change Charlie's life forever. I think that's the best way to put it. It caused him to become withdrawn, depressed, and cut off from his friends. It was said Charlie preferred living with his biological mom, Africa Shippings, rather than with his father, stepmother, and two younger half-siblings. And there was very good reason for that. So you see, Charlie's life under Mr. Bothuell and his stepmom, Monique Dillard Bothuell, was very far from typical. He was subject to grueling exercise routines, harsh punishments, and extreme expectations. His father, a registered nurse, ran a healthcare business, and his stepmom, who had a background in psychology, enforced a rigid, authoritarian household, one that would later come under intense scrutiny. And I also wanted to add that the fact that his stepmom had a background in psychology, and I'm not saying everyone who has a background in psychology would do this, it's just I'm wondering if some of that wasn't used to enforce some of the psychological torture that we're going to go into later on in the story. So, on June 16th of 2014, the Bothuell household flipped completely upside down. Charlie had been doing one of his regular workout routines. He then took a break to use the bathroom, and Charlie never came back. Mr. Bothuell called the police to report Charlie was missing. So, within 24 hours, Detroit police turned to the public for help. They said a 12-year-old boy had vanished without a trace in his own home. I will say that again. He vanished without a trace in his own home, and time was ticking. It was of the essence. Police described Charlie as 5'4", weighed around 120 pounds. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and when he vanished, he was wearing a red t-shirt, black and gray pajama pants, and a black and gray Fat Farm jacket. So searches of the home were carried out. Flyers went up around Detroit. Mr. Bothuell, he started going around door to door, handing them out to people, asking people, have you seen this missing boy? And then news outlets, as soon as they caught wind of the story, they began swarming the home and covering the case. Law enforcement urged anyone with information, if you know something, come forward. And they even offered a $1,000 reward if anyone had any information that led to Charlie. So between June 18th to the 21st, the search became increasingly intense. And of course, for very good reason. And if anyone has any information on this or has experienced this or is in law enforcement, please let me know. But it's my understanding that there is an unspoken rule. So the first 48 hours are absolutely critical in any missing persons case, especially when it comes to children. After that, it's said that the chances of finding someone alive drop dramatically. And as the days passed with no sign of Charlie, that grim reality began to set in. So the Detroit police chief, James Craig, addressed the media. He noted that while the case was still being treated as a serious missing persons investigation, they weren't ruling out the possibility of homicide at this point. Meanwhile, the focus of the investigation started narrowing in on Charlie's family, particularly Monique and Mr. Bothuell. See, Monique publicly expressed frustration, claiming they were being treated like suspects rather than grieving parents. Monique also did something that was quite interesting. She refused to take a polygraph test, citing a lack of trust in how she's been treated. She said, I understand we're the first people you're going to zero in on. That's understandable. But we've been more than open. We've been more than helpful, she said. But Mr. Bothuell, on the other hand, agreed to take a polygraph test, but it was under one condition. He refused to let specifically the Detroit Police Department administer it, citing he had a very negative experience with them. He insisted the FBI handle the test. And when it was conducted, the results were absolutely inconclusive. It provided no answers, just more questions. And I also wanted to piggyback a little bit further on that point. So when I was doing some research and reading through various articles and some documents that I could find, it was also stated that Monique was advised by her attorney not to take that polygraph test. Meanwhile, Mr. Bothuell was telling a completely separate story. He was stating that the media outlet was giving false information. He claimed that in this case, he was the primary suspect that law enforcement was looking into. And he also noted that law enforcement never asked Monique to take a polygraph test, which I thought was quite interesting. So back to the story. So adding to the confusion, Mr. Bothuell appeared on live television with Nancy Grace. And in one of those interviews, he revealed that Charlie had a history of running away. He claimed Charlie had once left home without permission, but was found near his mother's house a few hours later. This bombshell information complicated the case even further because it didn't make sense why he never mentioned this before. So now law enforcement is thinking, are we now looking at a potential runaway case? And then to add more salt to it, Monique also revealed a new chilling detail. She claimed Charlie had been upset before his disappearance because he hadn't finished his daily workout. In fact, because he didn't finish, she was planning on snitching to his father about it, who would then punish him severely. And when I heard this part of the story, it was kind of giving me vibes of a stepmom who doesn't like their stepkid and is doing anything just to see them get in trouble. I just, I don't know. I mean, if you guys are also seeing that as well, like let me know in the comments. But I just thought that was something very interesting that I just felt the need to like point out. It was fascinating to me. So Detroit police returned to the Bothell family townhouse again. This time they brought cadaver dogs and they did it with a more aggressive search strategy. They weren't leaving until they found anything. Charlie, dead or alive, evidence of some type of homicide, anything. And so, on the morning of June 25th, Detroit Police Chief James Craig held a press conference where he started to update the public. He confirmed that while the case was still technically a missing persons investigation, they had to start seriously considering the possibility that this is now a homicide. Meanwhile, Mr. Bothell was scheduled for another interview with Nancy Grace. And investigators use this as an opportunity to continue searching the Bothell townhouse. And that's when they made a very shocking discovery. Everyone, Charlie Bothell was found alive. He was hidden behind a makeshift barricade in his father's basement. Police had to move a large plastic drum and a wooden panel to reach the cramped, hidden space. There, in that space that they missed, they found Charlie. He was frail, he was disoriented, and he was terrified. Despite being missing for nearly 2 weeks, he was alive. But what they found that made the situation even more disturbing is that Chief Craig later revealed that inside of the hidden space where Charlie was found, there was bedding and food, suggesting that Charlie had been living there the entire time he was reported missing. What was even more troubling was the fact that Chief Craig stated it was unlikely that Charlie could have constructed the barricade himself. He stated the setup was too deliberate, too carefully arranged for a 12-year-old to have done it alone. This wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a prison. And here's the moment that would go down in true crime history, the Nancy Grace way. While Charlie was discovered in the basement, his father, Mr. Bothell, was live on air with Nancy, pleading for the public's help to find his son. And that's when, during the broadcast, Nancy Grace interrupted the interview to deliver breaking news. Charlie had been found in his own home. Instead of the emotional outbursts you would expect from a father who had just learned his son was alive, he had the most unsettling response I have ever seen in my entire life. It came off forced, theatrical, and unbelievable. To many viewers, it looked less like a relieved father and more like a man who had been caught in a lie. Now, it was about uncovering the dark truth of how he ended up in his own basement. He was immediately placed under police protection. So, From there, authorities made a very swift decision, and we're about to find out why. Charlie would not be returning to his father's home. Instead, he was released into the custody of his biological mother, Africa Shippings, along with his younger brother on his mother's side. His father, Mr. Bothell, was not allowed to see him at all. So it's interesting, and I also want to point out that after the Nancy Grace interview, where Mr. Bothell found out that his son was found alive, a lot of people, and I remember this case from years ago. Like, this was one of those cases that truly stuck with me for quite some time. You just can't unsee it. It was very interesting that the father continued to do the interview. People were noticing the little details as they were showing up in real time. He sat there and continued to do the interview. And then to make it worse is that when the interview was over, Mr. Bothell rushed back home. As you know, there were reporters, camera crew there. Of course, they want to catch every second of it from when, Charlie is found. And instead of him asking for his son, he continued to do interviews with the reporters. And in one of the particular interviews that he did, this guy, like, he broke down crying when he started being asked a bunch of questions and actually put his arm around he hugged the reporter, like, I just want to see my son. I just want to see my son. And like, you can tell, like, this guy really thinks he's in the nomination for like an Academy Award. It was the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen. But, and this brings me to my next point. So, around the time that this investigation and everything was going on, the Bothells, they hired an attorney. I believe Mr. Bothell had his own attorney, and his name was Mark Magidson. And his attorney spoke on his behalf and said that shortly after Charlie was found, law enforcement denied law enforcement denied him access to see his kid. He says he tried to see his son shortly after he was found. Law enforcement said no. He further argued that Mr. Bothell had an absolute right to see his son, but the authorities didn't see it that way. And what Mr. Bothell didn't know at this point is that the investigation had shifted from a missing persons case to something far more serious that they didn't even know the full extent of yet. And as details of what Charlie endured in that home began to surface, it became very clear why law enforcement was keeping him away. Charlie gave some bombshell testimony as to what happened. So, when Charlie was found, he was found by Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Kenneth Ducker. As they led Charlie upstairs, the 12-year-old asked a simple but very telling question. He said, "Is my dad home?" When the officer told him no, Charlie responded with one word. He said, "Good." It didn't take long for investigators to learn the full extent of what had been going on behind closed doors. Something wasn't quite right. For him to say good after all those days that you would stay hidden. And so Charlie then had to do a series of interviews with law enforcement, including the FBI. And in those interviews, Charlie revealed years of abuse at the hands of his father, Charlie Bothuell IV. He described being subjected to brutal military style workout regimens that pushed him to pure exhaustion. So, for some perspective on what the kid was forced to do, he had to do 100 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 100 jumping jacks, 25 arm curls, each arm with a 25-pound weight, 5,000 revolutions on the elliptical. And it doesn't stop there. He had to do this every single day, twice a day, 7 days a week. Failure to complete them resulted in severe punishments, often involving beatings with a PVC pipe. And that's another detail that I wanted to expand upon in the story. So while law enforcement, they were checking the house extensively during those days, they found a PVC pipe in the home that had blood stains on it. It was then sent to a lab where they were going to do a forensic analysis to see if that blood matched Charlie. And what came out of that is going to shock you by the time we get to the end of the story. So, these punishments weren't just enough for Charlie. These workouts weren't just enough for the father. It was torture. It was essentially torture for him. It was complete torture for Charlie. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many adults who can handle that, let alone a 12-year-old kid. And this is the part that was really weird to me. And remember, I was saying like Monique had a background in psychology. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was also psychological and relentless. So Charlie then went on to recount an incident in 2013 where he became so hopeless and so broken that he attempted to unalive himself at the age of 12, like at the age of 11, excuse me. So, yeah, he was 12 in 2014, and this happened in 2013. So he would be about 11 years old or so, 11 going on 12. And so he attempted to unalive himself, but even that didn't change anything. And Monique, she wasn't just a bystander in the abuse. No, Charlie alleged that she was a very active participant. In fact, he told investigators that on a few occasions she had choked and punched him and made very threatening remarks like, I don't like you and I will murder you. And Charlie mentioned another remark that she made. Like this one really chills down my spine because I don't know who would tell a kid that. Unlike you, I know where the sharp knives are. I can make you disappear. And she reinforced his father's punishments, and she made sure he stayed isolated from the outside world. And then Charlie revealed the chilling details of the hours leading up to his disappearance. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This is the part where I kind of had to brace myself for because what he reveals in this part really, I don't know what it sounds like. It touched a nerve for me. It really touched a nerve for me because that is, it's so psychologically and mentally sick. I don't even know what to even make of it. So Charlie revealed that Monique was the one that actually had a role in hiding him. So, according to Charlie, sorry, like I feel like my heart is racing, Monique knew where he was the entire time because it was Monique who forced him to hide in the basement in the first place. So, Charlie claimed his stepmother accused him of lying about completing his workout. And when he tried to defend himself, she cut him off and told him, "If you don't want anything bad happening to you, you better get out of my face. I've got a place for you to go." She then pointed toward a small space in the basement near the back wall. So she brought him to the basement, and then that's when she pointed to that small space in the area, which was near the back wall. Charlie had to climb over a 5-gallon drum to get to the cramped area. Once he was inside, Monique piled boxes on top of him, covering him up. Then Charlie overheard her go upstairs, call his father, and pretend to be panicked. She said, "Charlie is missing. I looked everywhere for him." But the entire time, Charlie was there. He was just right beneath her feet. She forced Charlie to stay hidden in that basement, trapped for days. And here's something even more disturbing. Monique was controlling what he ate. So remember when I told you that law enforcement said that they found bedding and they found food? It was very confusing how Charlie was able to get these things. Like, what was he eating and what was he surviving on for the last couple of days? And so Charlie reveals in his testimony that Monique was the one bringing him food. She would bring him small snacks here and there. And on some days, she didn't bring him anything at all. From a psychological perspective, she had full control of whether he ate or starved. And that is a form of psychological abuse. You don't heal from that. At least I think so. Like all the therapy in the world, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, do you know some, I don't know. I know some say, the physical scars they can heal, but to do that to a young child where they're basically feeding him protein shakes all the time and you're now starving him and he's doing all this exercise. He's a growing kid, probably has a fast metabolism. He's 12 and you have full control and you're starving him. So Charlie went on to also explain that he was forced to sleep in the basement. He wasn't allowed to have friends. He had no freedom. And for years, no one knew what was happening inside of that house. Now, with Charlie finally safe and speaking out, authorities had everything they needed to take legal action. But I do warn that the legal actions that the state takes, it takes a very interesting turn. And we're going to go into that right now. So, during the investigation into Charlie Bothuell's, Charlie's disappearance, authorities uncovered another legal issue inside of the Bothuell home. It was a firearm. This discovery was significant because in 2013, the same year I noticed where Charlie tried to actually unalive himself, that's how my mind works. I just started putting together some pieces. I don't know if it's true or not, but I just thought it was interesting that Monique Dillard had been convicted for purchasing a firearm without a permit, making it illegal for her to own or possess any guns. The presence of the weapon in the home meant she violated that parole. So as a result, Monique was arrested, but later released on a $5,000 personal bond. And so she was required to wear a tether as part of her release conditions. At the same time, authorities took further action to protect the other children in the household. So Charlie's two younger siblings, um, by Monique, aged 4 years and 10 months, they were removed from the home. Michigan Child Protective Services intervened and they cited very serious concerns about their safety in light of the horrific allegations of abuse against Charlie. And so the children were placed in the custody of Monique's relatives. I actually, and just on a side note, I thought that when kids are removed, they're not really put with relatives because what then stops the parent that is supposed to be away from the child from visiting them at another relative? Like, I don't know. I'm not too sure about like the whole CPS side of things. I just thought that was like an interesting detail. I guess that's better, of course, than like them being in foster care or in the system where they could, end up getting separated. So I don't know. I thought that was pretty interesting. And so in a petition, CPS filed a basically they filed a petition where they cited the severe abuse Charlie had endured. Beatings with a PVC pipe, being forced to live in the basement, and the extreme punishments he suffered under the control of his father and stepmother. And so, given the nature of these allegations, CPS just strongly recommended that the younger children not be returned to their parents' care. And now, the most significant blow came when prosecutors announced formal charges against Mr. Bothell and Monique. So, both were charged with torture and second-degree child abuse. It said that the torture charge alone carried the possibility of a life sentence. And as the legal battle unfolded, the weight of the case and the removal of the children put immense strain on Mr. Bothell and Monique's marriage. And so the once unified couple of abuse, they soon cracked under the pressure and they eventually separated. And so while the relationship fell apart, the legal consequences of what happened to Charlie were far from over. There's, of course, the legal proceedings. But this case, unfortunately, it never sees the light of day. And when I say the light of day, there was no jury trial. The legal battle that followed spanned around 18 months. And it was forcing Charlie, who was now 13, to testify in front of his father, Charles Bothuell IV, and his stepmother, Monique Dillard Bothuell. I'll say this much, like I watched the entire preliminary trial online, and in my opinion, it it was absolutely brutal. The attorneys were vicious. And I know I'm probably going to hear like this is typical. That's what attorneys are supposed to do, but it was vicious in the sense like the cross examinations were intense. And the entire time I was watching it, like I couldn't imagine being in Charlie's shoes as a child, having to relive the most scary moments of your life in that kind of environment, under the scrutiny of other people, under the watchful eye of your father who threatened you, and your stepmother who also threatened you and did all these terrible things. And again, it was during the testimony and during these legal proceedings that more bombshell revelations came out. Not just about Charlie, but the Bothwells as well. And things just got complicated really, really fast. So I did my best to summarize everything that really went down in the proceedings. So the defense didn't just deny the abuse. No, no, that would be too easy. They flipped the entire narrative. They portrayed Charlie as a disturbed, manipulative child with very serious behavioral issues. And so Mr. Bothell, so they had separate attorneys, by the way. So Mr. Bothell had his own attorney, and Monique, she also had her own attorney. And so defense attorney Sean Patrick Smith argued that Charlie was a danger to the household. He claimed Charlie had attempted to poison the family and set the house on fire. He painted Charlie as this unreliable witness, accusing him of fabricating the abuse allegations as part of a scheme to escape his father's home and live with his biological mother. Smith even continued to describe Charlie as living in a fantasy world, going as far as to suggest that the entire case had been staged. The defense questioned the credibility of Charlie's claim, pointing out a glaring issue. How was it possible that over multiple searches, including cadaver dogs, they failed to find Charlie in the basement? If he had been truly trapped down there the entire time, they argued, why didn't he make his presence known? And then came another shocking revelation. I told you this case is going to be an emotional roller coaster ride. I just had all kinds of feels when I was watching the proceedings and doing the research on this case because I had no idea at the time that it got this bad. So during the proceedings, it was revealed that Charlie had allegedly written a letter outlining a plan to poison his family. The letter stated that he would intentionally put bleach on the dishes, hoping they'd get so sick he could be sent back to live with his mother. But Charlie's attorneys, they pushed back on that claim. Charlie himself, when he was on the stand, said, yes, he admitted that he wrote the letter. But according to him, he said those were not his words. Charlie alleged that his stepmother, Monique, forced him to write that letter. And it was unclear to me the reason why she made him write that letter, but it sounds like to me she was lining him up. And it's weird that the letter, which it came up in the testimony the way that it did, like she's holding on specifically to that letter, almost like it's for that exact moment, for this moment that is happening right now. And so before we get into the next part, I want to warn you guys. If you are sensitive, this part is really, really sensitive. If if you're really, really sensitive to this upcoming part, I would, it's okay if you have to step away. You know, don't feel bad because like again, this was the case was a lot larger than I had initially expected. And so Charlie, while he was on the stand, he gave an even more detailed description as to what was happening to him during the time that he was living with his father, Mr. Bothell, and his stepmom, Monique. He said at just 11 years old, he had run away from his home, wandering the neighborhood for nearly 3 hours before police found him and brought him back. But instead of concern or relief, his father responded with punishment, brutal punishment. Charlie described that he was forced to lie across the dining room table while his father beat him with a stick, a wooden stick, and a PVC pipe. From that moment on, every beating included the PVC pipe if Charlie did not do what he was told to do for the day. I think Charlie was so traumatized by what happened that while he was on the stand, he kept saying things like he couldn't recall exactly how many times he had been hit over the years, but he remembered where. He said his neck. No, excuse me, sorry. He said his head, his back, his sides, his feet, and his buttocks. He vividly described the skin on his backside splitting open from the forces of the blow. He said, quote, "I could feel it, and I saw it," unquote. Charlie induced just Charlie endured the abuse he endured was it sounded very methodical. Charlie was often forced to roll over so different parts of his body could be beaten. Sometimes he wasn't even sure if he was wearing clothes when it happened. It became so unbearable that in May 2013, he attempted to unalive himself. He said it was a terrible place to be. The way I would be whooped and treated. I had gotten so upset and depressed and sad about being there to the point where he said he tried to unalive himself. Oh, this is just, oh my God. Okay. While Charlie was testifying, he spoke very softly throughout his testimony. He was barely looking up from his hands. The prosecutor had to repeatedly ask him to speak louder. You can see the anxiety just in his body language alone. During the testimony, they did not show his face due to the nature of the case and, what was being alleged. And I guess, just to protect his identity. Because, by this point, Charlie's voice is probably deeper. He probably looks different. And meanwhile, he's going through that and reliving the experience, and his father and stepmother just sat there emotionless. They stayed, they just stared straight ahead, occasionally glancing at their notes as their son recounted the horror of his childhood. Charlie's testimony revealed more than just physical abuse. It exposed years of neglect and psychological torment. Charlie also revealed that when he first moved in with his father and stepmother in November 2011, he had been placed in the fifth grade. But after just 1 month, his father pulled him out and switched him to homeschooling. His entire education consisted literally of just 2 textbooks. And if anyone who has ever been in 5th grade, you know you're not just doing 2 textbooks. These kids nowadays, they have like, I don't know, huge backpack. I remember having a huge, huge backpack when I was in school. Charlie then went on to further state that by the time he enrolled in public school in seventh grade, which would be around September 2014, he was hopelessly behind. Some things I wasn't taught or just didn't know, he said. His home life was equally isolating. Charlie, alleged that he slept in the den of their home on Nicollet Place until October 2013, when he got into trouble. So, as punishment, he was forced to sleep on the couch permanently. That became his bed for over a year. Charlie also went on to further describe that there were other punishments too. His father had a technique he called reaching for excellence. So essentially, the father would then force Charlie to stand in a corner with his arms raised for extended periods. His exercise routine was just as extreme. So it started at 5 a.m. with a protein shake and lasted up to 4 hours. And so all of those exercise things that I showed you, which I'm going to put right here, he's doing that every day, twice a day, 7 days a week. And he stated that if he didn't complete the workout or if he failed his schoolwork, he was beaten and then forced to continue exercising. Charlie said that he begged for the abuse to stop. He said, "Please stop, I'll do better." But his father ignored him and he continued to hurt him. He said instead he used fear to keep him in line, threatening to send him to military school in Utah or even Haiti if he disobeyed. He also stated that his stepmother, Monique, reinforced the abuse. So Charlie testified that she punched and choked him multiple times. Um, he further reiterated that he didn't have any friends. He wasn't allowed to go outside except for like quick grocery store trips or to accompany Monique when she dropped off his younger brother, who had autism at school. But despite all of this, Charlie never told his mother about what was going on in the household. In his mind, he truly believed that if he said anything, it might either make things worse or it would do nothing at all. He said, "I just didn't feel comfortable. I don't think anything would change, and I would still end up in the same place." Y'all, this is a hard story. This is a really hard story. Like, it's causing me to have like all kinds of like stress responses as I'm telling this story right now. Like, I'm sorry. I've just been like scratching because it's causing me to like, I don't know, like I guess I physically show stress or something. Um, so there were other key testimonies in the case that came up from like law enforcement and medical experts. Basically, all of them, including the detective who discovered Charlie in the basement, they basically all confirmed that the injuries looked consistent with Charlie's claims. And, you know, despite the overwhelming allegations in June 2015, the judge dismissed. So in 2015, the judge dismissed the torture charges against Mr. Bothell and Monique, citing that there was insufficient evidence. However, they still faced second-degree child abuse. So by January 2016, so this case dragged on pretty long. Oh man, this case really, really dragged out. So yeah, by time January 2016, Charlie was 14 and the case reached its resolution. Mr. Bothell accepted a plea deal. So he pled guilty to fourth degree child abuse. And so, as part of the agreement he received, he agreed to do 18 months of probation, mandatory anger management classes, and he received a court order prohibiting further contact with Charlie. Essentially, he lost custody of his son and he was ordered to like pay some kind of court fees, but he 100% lost custody of his son. So Charlie was fully sent to live with his mother, no doubt. Now, Monique Dillard Bothell, on the other hand, she had a very, like, something about her, especially. She just had a very odd outcome the entire time in this case. Monique is like undercover something. I don't know. Her plea deal wasn't really made public. So the only thing I was ever able to find was that her probation violation was dismissed after the defense argued that the firearm found in the home was not only disassembled, but it didn't belong to her. And it was also stated that her record would be wiped clean after 6 months if she avoided further legal trouble. However, it didn't really state whether she got her kids back in the end. Again, if anyone's an attorney or if you guys know anything better about this than I do, let me know in full context, maybe like what that means. But I'm assuming if her record is wiped clean after 6 months, that means the whole child abuse thing kind of like goes under the rug and she would get her kids back. At least that's how I'm seeing it because it's going to look like it never happened. And so for Mr. Bothell, he stated at the end of everything that, I had no more money left to fight with. And I wouldn't have been able to change that in time for trial, Mr. Bothell said. This process broke my family and my finances. It's time for me to move forward and begin rebuilding my life. And a spokeswoman for the prosecutor's office said the deal was reached with Charlie Bothuell in mind. The two attorneys basically came to the same agreement. They said that they just wanted to spare Charlie any more time on the witness stand. And so after 18 months of legal battles, media scrutiny, and public outrage oh my God, I had such a hard time getting through this story. I'm sorry. The case of Charlie Bothuell came to an end. I think it's like a nervous or stress response. The case came to an end. And that was it for Charlie. But it wasn't fully it for Mr. Bothell. See, Mr. Bothell had the audacity to file a lawsuit against Nancy Grace. So, in a surprising turn of events after the case, Mr. Bothell over here filed a defamation lawsuit against Nancy Grace and CNN. He claimed, his trifling self claimed, that Grace's comments, particularly calling him a garden variety sadist, was defamatory. And if anyone knows anything about defamatory cases, and if we haven't watched like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial, I thought with defamation cases, like, it's not enough to prove that a statement is offensive. You also got to show that the statement was both false and harmful to your reputation. So the lawsuit was eventually dismissed. The court revealed or ruled that Grace's statements, while provocative and salacious, they didn't meet the legal threshold for defamation, especially given the fact that Mr. Bothell had already pled guilty to fourth-degree child abuse. Like, you pled guilty, bro. Like, you're caught. That's it. Anyway, so that is the end of the story of The bizarre disappearance of Charlie Bothuell. Oh, my throat is getting a little dry. So, to me, while the decision to permanently separate Charlie from his father and his stepmother and place him in his biological care was truly probably the best possible outcome for him, I still believe the court system failed him. The abuse Charlie described was absolutely horrific, that it was causing me to have like stress going through the story. And yet when it was all said and done, his father and stepmother essentially got a slap on the wrist. So he has to deal with his years of abuse and torment, and they get to, especially Monique, she just gets to live her life as if it never happened. It just gets erased. And another thing that bothered me a lot during this case, and remember when I talked about the PVC pipe? So even during the trial, the way that the case was handled just didn't sit right with me. So, for example, it was mentioned that investigators were testing the blood that was found on the PVC pipe. Yet I looked everywhere and I could not find online the results of that test. If that wasn't Charlie's blood or the results were inconclusive, why would they hide that as evidence from the public? They said they were testing it. If anyone has the answer to that, please let me know. I am very curious if you guys see anything about that. But I couldn't see anywhere online, as deep as I dug into this case. I truly could not find anything that said, yeah, that was his blood on the PVC pipe. More like there was like suspicion that it was, and it probably was. I don't know. I truly don't know. But that's just, my humble opinion. Okay, guys. So that's the end of the case. I'm sorry. I'm like just tapped out because I am disturbed with everything that happened. I just hope that wherever he is right now in life, that he's healing and he is just surrounded by love and support. Um, I did not look into where he is now or what he's doing. That should just be, I guess, an area of his life that he should just, yeah, grow and rebuild. Um, so anyway, there you go, folks. That is the story of Charlie Bothell V. Tell me what you think in the comments. Please like, subscribe, follow. Check out my other pages. I am on Instagram and I am on TikTok doing these true crime stories. And I really, really look forward to doing the next one. So thank you for watching. Thank you for spending time with me under the moonlight, and see you guys again.